I want to thank all of you for joining me today. I want to take an opportunity to thank Alice and Nabsy for having me. I want to thank our colleagues at Footsteps to Brilliance. Eileen, I know you're with us today, so thank you so much. And importantly, I want to thank all of you for the work that you do on a regular basis in improving and advancing educational outcomes and success for our children across the country. And I would say that I know secondhand how difficult this work is, as my wife is actually an elementary school principal. And I know that it ain't no 8 to 2 o'clock job. It's probably not even an 8 to 8 o'clock job. And that you folks, whether you're an administrator or in the classroom or supporting our educational system in some way or another, you're working around the clock, 24/7 in this environment. And it's high stakes, especially right now. So I'm really humbled to be with you, and I'm glad that you could be with me today. And I hope today's session is helpful to you as you go about doing your work in your local communities. A little bit about me. I have been working in nonprofit for 2 decades, a little bit more than that actually. The vast majority of my career has been focused on designing and implementing programs to promote economic security for children and families, really kind of breaking the intergenerational cycle of poverty. I've done direct service work, working with people who are experiencing homelessness and very tragic events in their lives, young in my career, to more recently as an administrator, before taking on my current role as running this particular United Way. I worked as Chief Operating Officer for a community action organization, administering an array of community development block grant programs, many of the programs that you are familiar with, Head Start, LIHEAP, emergency food programs, childcare resource and referral, emergency housing, an array or a continuum of services for children and families. So I would say that that's been my life's work, has been to really work to promote socioeconomic opportunity for all. And so that is really the perspective that I bring today, and that's the perspective of today's presentation. So, before we get started, it would be great just in the chat. Can I get a quick hand wave for those of you who are working in the classroom in some way, shape, or form? Awesome. And how many of you are working as educator administrators, whether that's as a principal or in your central office? Okay. And how many of you are working in nonprofit? Okay, great. And how many of you are just active and engaged citizens, or not just, but active and engaged citizens? I guess all of us are, right? So that's helpful. I just want to get a sense of our audience today. I'd say the part that gives me most aggravation is the technology. So you'll have to bear with me. Boom. First test done. Check the box. So thank you so much. I'm going to just fool with my screen here a little bit. And I am going to do. No, I'm not going to do that. I am going to, Gabby, how do I do the?
So full screen?
Full screen, yeah.
Yeah, if you go to the very bottom right, do you see that plus minus slider bar? There's a little thing that looks like.
Oh yes, there she is.
Well, so the button to
the
button to the left of the minus. Click that. It looks like an old school like chart stand. Yeah, click that button.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And how do I get rid of these windows? I just do a minus?
We don't see them on our end. It might just be on your end.
Oh, you don't see them? Okay, great. Well, that's helpful to me. Thank you. So bear with me, folks. You're getting a quick preview of all of my slides. And sorry to cause any seizures by going through that so quickly. I'm going to bring that up again. Gabby, what do I do here?
So same thing, you
Full
can,
screen, right?
yep, you can click that same button you clicked before, and on our end, we see it on our whole screen. We don't see
Great,
anything.
thank you. I feel like a middle school social studies teacher, so thank you
Oh,
so
you're
much.
okay.
So, so the presentation today, we're going to take a look at the relationship between poverty and educational outcomes, the impact that socioeconomic instability has on a child's ability to learn and thrive, and the challenges that parents face as active agents in their child's education and development while struggling to provide for their family's most basic needs. We'll also look at the role community-based organizations and comprehensive place-based efforts can play in leveling the playing field by leveraging two-generation strategies that focus equally and intentionally on services and opportunities for children and the adults in their lives. A little bit about our community. We are in North Central Massachusetts. We are a blend of rural and urban. Our economic engines are tourism, manufacturing, farming, healthcare, and retail. Within North Central Mass region, we have 4 major urban areas: Fitchburg, Leominster, Gardner, and Athol. A little bit of trivia for you. Leominster is the birthplace of Johnny Appleseed, who helped to introduce apples into the modern economy in the 1700s. So a little bit of trivia for you. Within our urban areas of Fitchburg, Leominster, Gardner, and Athol, residents, we have significantly higher rates of poverty than the state average. And you see that fall along a number of different lines. And I would say the highest concentrations of poverty are Fitchburg, Gardner, and Athol. And thinking about linguistic diversity, the majority of speakers of other languages are in Fitchburg, with 43.5% living in poverty, those who speak other languages, which is a significant amount. According to the US Census, across our county, we have a significant percentage, about a third, who can't even afford their most basic needs. And a lot of the economic insecurity is driven by unemployment, skills gap, low wages, low overall educational attainment, and the high cost of living here in our region. A little bit about United Way. I always appreciate the opportunity to talk about United Way and the work that we do. I know that most of you are familiar with United Way and our work. If you get 10 people in a room and you ask them if they're familiar with United Way's brand, all 10 will raise their hands. If you ask folks if they have good feelings about United Way, 9 or 10 folks will raise their hands. But if you ask those people specifically what United Way does, you might get 10 different answers. And that really speaks to the depth and breadth of our work, but also poses a challenge in terms of direct line of sight to our impact. So again, I always appreciate an opportunity to talk about our community impact proposition and how do we advance outcomes in our community. Our United Way distributes about $2 million to community charities throughout our region. We provide technical assistance to nonprofit organizations. We bring organizations together to work on problems that are bigger than any one entity can solve or address. We support financially over 40 nonprofits in our region. And our focus areas are education, youth development, economic opportunity, and basic needs. And looking at sort of how we do our work, we have a 3-year cycle of impact, and it begins by really understanding the issues that are impacting the residents in our community. So we go about a process of conducting intensive research around the issues that are impacting low-income, middle-income, and working families in our region. We engage multiple stakeholders, public, private sector, municipalities, universities, everyday citizens, to work and address those issues We provide critical funding support to what we call top-in-class organizations in our region, while also working with them on outcome measurement and making sure that our investments are successful and we're driving that impact in the community. We also mobilize volunteers. I think many of you may know United Way through that portal, where we're able to deploy traditional volunteers into the community to do everything from designing and building playgrounds, to serving on nonprofit boards, to working in food pantries, an array of opportunity to help people kind of fold into the community. And then we advocate. We don't engage in partisan political activity, but we do advocate for public policies that are consistent with our impact agenda. So I want to start off today talking about Lydia. Lydia is a woman that I had an opportunity to meet many years ago at a United Way roundtable. And Lydia shared her experience, and it's an experience that is all too familiar and similar to what millions of people go through in our society. Lydia was living with her grandmother and her young daughter in a 2-bedroom apartment. They both earned minimum wage, but together through their combined income, they were somehow able to get by. Unfortunately, Lydia's mom passed away, and with her passing went half the family's income. Not long after that, about 2 to 3 months down the road, she found herself homeless and at the doors of a family shelter. But this wasn't just a family shelter. It was an organization that had a comprehensive array of programs, that had a heavy emphasis on partnerships with counterpart organizations throughout our community, that really believed in and facilitated holistic support for families. So Lydia was able to get that roof over her head, get fed, get those basic needs taken care of, but they also helped her set a chart to be successful and to achieve socioeconomic success and independence. And that organization was able to immediately enroll her child in Head Start through a relationship they had with that Head Start program. Many of you know and are familiar with Head Start and the richness of those program offerings, helping both parents and children. Lydia's child had a lot of complex needs and a lot of trauma associated with the passing of the grandmother. So they were able to provide her with mental health, behavioral health support, nutrition, literacy, all of those key elements that a child needs to develop on track, right? And they were able to connect to a workforce development organization called Jewish Vocational Services, also to help her with employment training. They were able to get her into an affordable housing unit through a local community development corporation who they had an MOU with. So she was in safe, affordable housing. In order to work, she needed that childcare, so they connected her to Head Start. And then she was able to connect a training voucher to participate in the program so that she can get certified in radiation technology in the healthcare field, which is a good job that kind of yields a family sustaining wage. So fast forward 18 months later, she's in a job at a local hospital. Her child is kind of finishing out Head Start and ready to enter kindergarten. And she's thriving. Now, it's never perfect. Life is messy, right? But she really achieved a stable place in her life. Years later, actually, I had a chance to meet with Lydia again. And I'm not actually sure she remembered me, but I got an update on her story. And her daughter is now a freshman at the University of Massachusetts Lowell as a psychology major, right? And so Lydia's story really resonated with me because it was so antithetical to what I'd seen for years leading up to that. Families having to navigate a helter-skelter system of programs and services that did not meet them where they were, that had confusing and often punitive eligibility requirements, that did not assess or capitalize on the strength and resiliency of those they served, and at best would provide a temporary relief to what was increasingly becoming a permanent condition. Now, what was it about Lydia's experience that enabled her to transcend her very difficult situation? She was able to access a user-friendly continuum of services for both her and her daughter. She reached out to an organization that had a heavy emphasis on connectivity and addressing the needs of both her and her child. The programs and services her daughter received had a focus on everything from mental health to nutrition to early literacy. Lydia was able to address both her short and long-term goals, including shoring up her basic needs, food, a roof over her head, mental health services, while also setting a course to long-term financial stability. And receiving that support she needed to secure new housing, build the skills she needed, and to gain that sustainable employment. So how do we learn from Lydia's experience and use it to inform our own practices to create a user-friendly ecosystem of tools and supports that can break the intergenerational cycle of poverty? In this case, how do we leverage this ecosystem to drive both economic and educational success for children and families? So looking at the data around school readiness and poverty, excuse me, as I bounce around here a little bit. Sorry, folks, just kind of going on my slide order. And I am totally giving you a full preview of everything. So I am going to start over here. Here, we're going to do it like this. It's just easier for me. Hope this works for you guys. Here, thank you. So in thinking about the correlation between economic instability and academic success, 1 in 6 Americans, 1 in 5 children live in poverty. Children in poverty are more likely to experience emotional and social challenges, mental health issues, chronic stressors in everyday life, and lags and significant changes in their brain structure in areas related to memory and emotion. And children living at poverty are significantly more likely to have developmental delays. Children who grow up in poverty are going to earn less income, right? Which is pretty obvious. And looking at the issue of hunger, which is really an outgrowth of economic instability. It's very difficult to learn or do anything when you're hungry, right? Pretty obvious. Hungry children do more poorly in school. As we can see, evidenced in reading and math skills. Tons of studies done by Feeding America. By 3rd grade, children who had been food insecure in kindergarten saw a 13% drop in their reading and math test scores compared to their food secure peers, right? And so there is an obvious correlation. There are physiological impacts on a child's ability to focus and learn if they're hungry, right? And a lot of this is obvious, and I think what researchers typically do is they find scientific facts to kind of back up the obvious, right? So I could probably go through thousands of slides to back all of that up. A little bit on school readiness here. Children from low-income families are less likely to be successful, obviously. In looking at literacy and school readiness, the data is compelling. Children in poverty have less access to reading materials and technology. Parents are often consumed with the stresses associated with economic desperation and are working literally around the clock for wages that don't cover the cost of living. And so when children do move into an academic environment, they're at a distinct disadvantage. And with COVID-19, we've seen an exacerbation of an existing problem, particularly around students of color. A recent study in the spring of 2020, students of color were about 3/5 behind their white counterparts. And we're seeing these inequities as really pervasive through all elements of our society along racial and ethnic lines. A study by McKinsey shows that if the current rate continues, by June of 2022, students of color could be up to a year behind. right? So there is, folks, a real sense of urgency around this. And so poverty, equity, and school readiness cannot be achieved in the classroom alone, right? Yet there are reams and reams of data linking poverty and economic instability to poor student outcomes, as well as measurable inequities in school readiness and performance between those experiencing it and those who are not. Yet most of the research findings and recommendations, public policy initiatives, and overall focus has been largely on in-classroom solutions, addressing poverty through the narrow confines of teachers, guidance counselors, and administrators, which fails to acknowledge the larger condition and the importance of community or regionally based initiatives to help the parents of those children transcend their condition and to fully integrate into the economy, right? And we see this as when we peer through the research, right? Prominent researcher, 2019, I did not include their names because I don't want to seem as though I'm indicting, right? But I think this does capture a sentimentality which is not constructive. There are valid points here, but I think there is a misfocus, right? So if we are truly committed to closing the achievement gap between students raised in poverty and those raised in more affluent homes, we need to use the most current research, alter our classroom environments, empower students, teach social skills, embody respect, create inclusive classrooms, and recognize the signs of poverty. I would say yes, of course. But is that really addressing the root of the problem? Another quote from a very prominent education foundation. We must attack issues like course rigor, teacher quality, and accountability. Unless our schools are held accountable for the achievement of all groups of children, too many will continue to sweep poor outcomes under the rug, right? And so what is this individual saying? And some might interpret this as teachers and our educational system as perpetuating poverty, right? And that's a pretty hefty burden. And so again, I think we need to look at more systemic origins around socioeconomic inequality and poverty if we're going to be sincere in our efforts to create equity in the classroom. So, leveraging two-generation approaches that address the complex needs of caregivers and their children is absolutely necessary if we want to achieve equity in the classroom and to, again, break that intergenerational cycle of poverty. And there's a spectrum. There are programs that are child-focused, but include some resources and supports for caregivers. And there are programs that are adult-focused, but have some services and supports for children. I would say the latter you find more in a social service environment, and the former you find more in an educational or early education or school environment. And then there are programs and initiatives that look to serve children and caregivers equally by addressing the complex needs of both. And we see this often in place-based or collective impact initiatives that look to improve communities through comprehensive partnerships between school districts, community-based organizations, foundations, and in some cases, local government. So the Aspen Institute has done a ton of work on this, and I would encourage you to look up Aspen Ascend to get a lot of data on the efficacy of two-generation approaches to educational success and whole family success. And I would specifically look at, and I'm going to have some examples of some other work happening across the country later on. There are, let me pull this down a little bit. Go. There are really 6 elements rather, to a successful two-generation approach to anti-poverty work. As you can see, a lot of it focuses on K-12 education, post-secondary pathways, helping to build family assets, health and well-being, social networks. These are all the gears that need to be working together, right, to promote that holistic two-generation success that I'm talking about. And it's no surprise that each of these elements were in place for Lydia as she embarked on her journey from crisis to economic health and academic success for her daughter. Now, research by Aspen and others has affirmed that building financial capability, even incrementally, can have a significant impact on a child's academic success. A $3,000 difference in a parent's income when their child is young is associated with a 17% increase in the child's future earnings. A relatively small increase in household income can have a lasting positive impact on the life of a child. Almost 3/4 of single mothers with children are low income. And poverty alleviation is often dependent on a family's ability to really manage their financial situation. We call it financial capability to build that economic security. And children with as little as $500 in a designated account for college are more likely to enroll and graduate. And even smaller dollar amounts help children see college education as a possibility. And when I talk about assets, I'm talking about hard assets like housing and car, computer, technology, but also soft assets, right? Like education, accreditation, and the ability to be competitive in the job market. And looking at child development, investments in early education can yield a 13% year-on return in terms of societal costs. And we know that there's compelling data linking investments in early education to reduce costs down the road. And that the problem with this, though, is that public policy experts, elected officials, there's not a lot of patience, right? And so if you invest in early education, you're going to see that return later in life, and you don't have that immediate gratification. So, so we need to think about investing short-term for those long-term results and being able to have the patience for those to kind of pan out. And thinking about locally, and thinking about our work at United Way and our process, I'm just trying to, excuse me, folks, I'm just trying to get this whole screen.
So Kory, you can use that same slider at the bottom with the plus
Yeah,
minus.
I just like I like to have the numbers in my slides. Just that's.
Oh,
fine.
I see. Yeah.
Whatever. So in looking at our community assessment process, which I referred to before, is conducting that intensive research to identify what are those issues that are impacting community residents and where best can we put our investments to drive community change. We conducted over 300 interviews, over 300 community surveys, over 24 interviews in focus groups, and we looked at reams and reams of publicly available data. And our overarching, and what we found was really no surprise, right? Families continue to struggle to meet the high cost of housing, transportation, utilities, and other essentials. There is a need for constructive opportunities for youth, specifically initiatives that promote skills development and academic success and social emotional support. A significant number of young children are not in formal childcare settings, and many parents cannot afford the high cost of childcare, with significant wait lists for subsidies, affordable center-based care, and Head Start. Here is where that literacy gap really widens. There is that lack of access to high quality childcare programs and children not really getting that start that they need as they move forward in life, right? So from that, our orientation is grounded in the reality that there are strategies and milestones that are predictive of child, individual, and whole family success, right? Being born healthy, developing on track, grade to grade, post-secondary, getting a home, productive and engaged citizens. These are the critical milestones that one has to move through and achieve that are indicators of socioeconomic success and trajectory. While at the same time, there are barriers and pressures that are pushing families in that trajectory down. Poverty and unemployment and how it affects early school readiness, right? Children with developmental delays that are not being screened early enough, right? On up as you get into the youth space, lack of positive adult-family relationships, right? Lack of constructive out-of-school time outlets, lack of public urgency about the impact of having low-skilled, low-wage workers that don't have the skills to compete in the modern economy, right? Families that can't afford their basic needs. And public funding streams can result in isolated efforts that are disintegrated and ineffective, right? So you have forces that are and pressures that are pushing families down, and then we, the collective we as a community, need to acknowledge these milestones and help to prop those families up, to create that trajectory, that pathway out of poverty. And so for us, locally, we're doing this through the creation and implementation of the North Central Mass Early Literacy Zone, a 10-district partnership to boost child literacy, pathways for youth, and the creation of a user-friendly ecosystem of programs, services, and tools to help parents achieve economic stability and to be active agents in their child's academic development. The key elements, right? Engage families before children enroll in school. Create a platform for literacy that can work across geography in English and Spanish, creating and getting those literacy tools out, promoting family financial stability, promoting early education and care, enabling collaboration with other providers, and then really looking at school readiness by 3rd grade. Now that orange piece, right, is a newer element to our work. And it's an acknowledgement that we cannot look at these issues in isolation and that we need to have a holistic approach. So I don't have, in the interest of time, I'm not going to go over every element, but I do want to go over 2 critical components of this. Our work to promote family financial stability and our work to promote child literacy. How are we promoting economic security for adult heads of households? And our work around financial stability includes ensuring a strong safety net while investing in organizations that provide economic development support, including financial coaching, access to financial products, access to workforce development, services for low-income residents, and an ability to track individual and aggregate outcomes. Investing in capacity building for organizations to integrate financial education into existing services, and then leveraging the financial community and the business community to have access to financial products for low-income residents, right? And a lot of this is helping to essentially, many of the folks who had been, experiencing economic instability to fully integrate into the economy, right? And what are those critical pieces? So ensuring that safety net, but also creating those ladders of opportunity for people to move forward. Our early literacy work has focused on providing, has both a sort of a human and technological element, right? We are working with a number of local companies and businesses to direct literacy ambassadors and tutors to local schools to provide one-to-one tutoring and mentor support during the course of a school year. And we have piloted that program with the Leominster Public School System, and we'll be scaling that up over time. We have a specific nutritional health program directed at our local school system, where we're able to distribute meals to the Leominster Public Schools and Fitchburg Public Schools students and families, as well as nutritional information and how to access other resources in our community around food and nutrition. Investing in early education. So general operating support and other forms of funding for early care organizations, program funding for center-based programs that serve low to moderate income families and children, and then a specific emphasis on helping those organizations build the capacity to do developmental screening for developmental delays and to connect those children to the interventions that they need. So that broadly is our work around early literacy. But I do want to spotlight one particular component, which is the technology component. So we are proud to partner with our colleagues at Footsteps to Brilliance to advance a learning application that's pretty unique and effective. It's an app that really applies a 21st century approach to a 20th century concept. Now, I spoke a little, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how that works in a second. I spoke a little bit about all of that, the challenges, right, that youth and family have in being school ready and having that literacy support at a young age. And, you know, there's tons of compelling data to reinforce that. 61% of low-income children have no children's books in their homes. Children, and you'll have to forgive me, this slide says welfare parents. I would not choose that term, but parents on public assistance have a 30 million word gap compared to children who are of higher socioeconomic status, right? So you see, when children enter kindergarten, there is a built-in disadvantage. And, you know, there's a lot of reasons for this, right? You know, parents and children don't have access to technology. They don't have access to books. Parents are stressed out. They're working 2 jobs. They're dealing with financial insecurity and pressures. And, you know, all of these snowball into this, you know, inequity and this 30 million word gap, which, you know, really starts kids out in life, you know, well behind their counterparts and their peers, right? And so what the Footsteps technology app does is it takes the 20th century concept of a book drive, and I think you're all familiar with a book drive. I think many of you have probably administered book drives. You get a table, you get a bunch of books, you set that table up at a shopping mall or at a public housing authority or where there's a lot of traffic. You give out books to parents as well as a pamphlet on maybe reading to children, the importance of literacy, and then they disappear, right? And you really don't know what happens from that point. But what if instead of giving out a few books or even a bag of books, you could give a parent hundreds of books? And what if you could provide them with endless content, including tools and exercises that help parents read and support their children's literacy? What if you could provide that content in both English and Spanish? And what if you could provide parents with kits so that their child can write and illustrate their own stories? And what if you could track, and this is an important piece for us in a collective impact, from a collective impact perspective, what if you could track usage data on both the individual and aggregate levels? And that's what this technology does, right? And so, you know, imagine a book drive where you know what books are being read, endless books, You know down to the student level, you know to the aggregate level, and you can course correct. You can do additional outreach and marketing in different pockets in the community because you know where those hotspots are. And so I just want to kind of show you sort of how this works. It's an app that you can use everywhere. And again, I'm not selling you this app. I'm just giving you a sense of how we use technology to close that gap, because without technology, you can't get to the scale that you might want to. So here's an exercise. Our child can create a book. This is a book about the eclipse. And these young people, this is a sun and a moon and a planet. We live on planet Earth. The sun has rays that travel in straight lines. This is a moon. When the moon goes between the sun and the earth, it covers the rays of light. This is a solar eclipse. And then written by Justin Raymond, age 7, right? So, you know, giving kids an opportunity to read information and then write about it. And there's an interactive element, which is key to child literacy. For us, from a scaling purposes, we've been able to finance this so that it is free and available to all students living in our literacy zone in those 10 districts. We do a lot of incentives. We run contests, reading contests across our community to promote the tool and to promote its usage, to promote child literacy. We just finished our winter challenge, and here are our winners. And I have to say, from a demographic perspective, right, these children are at risk, right? They come from low socioeconomic households. They fit that profile of children that would be exposed to less books, less words, and who would be dealing with a literacy gap by the time they move on into their further along in their elementary and middle school years, right? But here we have Ania, who read almost 30,000 words, spent over 30 hours on reading. Sammy, over 25,000 words, and Julia not far behind. So we're celebrating these children. We're celebrating and acknowledging all the work that they've done. And we are really trying to close that million word gap that I talked about. As I mentioned, on the individual level, and I have permission from Sammy's family to share a lot of this, just so you know, we can look at Sammy's progress. We can look at his growth in a number of different domains: phonics, logical reasoning, language. And then on the aggregate level, and this helps from a foundation or funder or investor or backbone agency perspective, I can see the aggregate usage. I can see how many words throughout our literacy zone were read, how many books were read, where they were read, and I can break that down by town. And so on the back end, I can see, and we can see all of that data, which allows us to continue to inform our programming, right? So I wanted to show you that tool because it's an example of using technology to boost literacy, and is, again, one of a number of strategies that we're leveraging, but we wouldn't be able to get to the scale that we want to without this literacy app and without leveraging and leaning into technology. Now, I've talked about programs to support economic success for families. I've talked about pathways for youth. I've talked about early literacy initiatives and programs. And so the next piece is, how do we connect the dots, right? An important element of this. How do we create a user-friendly ecosystem of access to these programs and services for children and families? And how do we track outcomes on both the individual and aggregate level to measure and inform our work, right? And so what we have have in place or are working on are a number of those elements. Creating a no wrong door for families who are seeking services, so that if a family seeks housing support, that they are immediately referred, and there's a warm handoff to organizations that provide workforce development, nutrition. It's that Lydia experience, right? Provide resource support for organizations that engage in formal partnerships and really promote collaboration. Creating a clearinghouse and index of community resources and how to access, including eligibility criteria that can be distributed broadly. We're integrating financial counseling into existing services so that when someone comes forward for fuel assistance or is working as a parent that has a child in Head Start or is receiving services from volunteer income tax from VITA for the earned income tax credit, that we're leveraging that moment and providing an intervention and providing financial capability support to those heads of households. Deploying and positioning resource navigators at public housing authorities, school districts, hospitals, community-based organizations, right? Folks who know where those resources are, who can connect folks up to that continuum and can slow walk through families through those existing services that are often confusing and difficult to understand and difficult to capitalize on. So, and then leveraging existing municipal, state, and federal resources, which is important, right? There are a lot of funds that are being driven into the community, but they're operating in silos. And so how can we braid those together to come up with, coherent strategies around whole family success? We want to track individual and family community level outcomes, and we're doing that through a lot of the data system that we have in place and an outcome measurement regime, which is pretty intensive. And then United Way is serving as a backbone entity for resource management, data management, and allocation, and then continuing to build out those partnerships. Last couple slides here. I want to give time for some questions, but here are an example of some place-based initiatives, right, that have been successful around the country. And I do believe that these slides are going to go into some shared file for you to access. So, but just to tick off some of the ones that have been more successful across our country. Promise Neighborhoods, which is a DOE initiative, which advances cradle to career initiatives across our country. We have Purpose-Built Communities, which is really about helping to build connectivity among community leaders. Choice Neighborhoods, which braids public and private funding to drive sort of local solutions to local problems. You have LISC's Building Sustainable Communities effort, which is really a grass-based effort to improve communities through collaboration and community organizing. Really relevant to you as district representatives is the Strive Together initiative. I think many of you may be familiar or even working on this, where it's leveraging data at the school and community level to drive positive student outcomes. It began in Cincinnati and Louisville and has expanded to cities across the country and has been incredibly effective on a local and regional level in those communities. And then the Integration Initiative, which really seeks to promote economic development through systems change. So those are examples. If you Google any of those, you'll get tons and tons of information on the architecture and model of those programs, the data, how have they been effective, what are they doing? And then thinking about your own community, right? How can you implement this, right? It seems expensive. It seems, tough to get all of those resources together, and it is. But I just want to remind you that there are existing resources in your community, your local community foundation. All schools, as you know, have a McKinney-Vento homeless liaison that's federally funded, that's really responsible for helping to provide counsel and resource direction to parents and children who are experiencing housing instability and homelessness. Your local community action organization has a range of programs. Head Start, which I would call a model 2-generation program. Many of your students are coming from Head Start programs, or you might have students with siblings in Head Start programs. Those programs have family service workers who can help work with adults in helping them achieve their life goals, as well as staff that work on the child level to advance educational outcomes. And most communities have a community development organization, nonprofit organization that's focused on community development, and your Chamber of Commerce. One quick thing about United Way, my interest is advancing socioeconomic equity for children and families. I cannot do that without partnering with school districts, right? We want to help. So if I get a call from a local superintendent, I am picking up that phone before the first ring, because I want to do all I can to augment what's happening in the building in an out-of-school environment to bring about whole family success. So I encourage you to reach out to your local United Way, and I'm always willing to make a connection to you with your local United Way. In summary, there is a direct and absolute correlation between poverty, economic instability, and educational outcomes. Much of the focus has been to leverage in-school solutions, connecting students to remediation, course rigor, teacher accountability, class environments, and very little focus on addressing the actual condition of poverty in the context of educational success. Two-generation approaches can be effective in supporting educational success for education and economic success for caregivers and their children. Place-based initiatives can be effective platforms for two-generation strategies as they leverage whole community assets to support whole family success. And there are a range of existing resources in most communities to tap into, as well as a number of place-based initiatives to learn from. So that's a lot. I think I will back my fire hose away from you guys now, because I think I shared a lot of information. And I do want to open it up for questions, comments, or conversation at this point. And that's a lot, guys. So thank you so much. And thank you for your patience with my technological lack of capability there. So love to open it up. I'm going to take a look at the chat right now. And feel free to jump on the mic and ask questions. And I do have a couple chat questions and comments too. And we have here.
Kory, this is Vicki Scott with Legacy Builders Foundation. I'm CEO and founder, and I was fascinated with, how are you? How are you? Invited today by Eugene and also Eileen and Sabrina, but fascinated with your conversation around assisting families in navigating. And as CEO and founder of Legacy Builders Foundation, we focus on providing access and equity to children and families, especially in the areas of education, healthcare, housing, economic and community development. But you mentioned having those navigators in the community. And so can you elaborate a little on that process and where you have, located them? Are they in schools? Or are they in community centers, boys and girls club? Where are they?
Thank you. So what we're not doing is sort of creating full-time navigators and positioning them at these key hotspots. What we are doing is training existing staff at those organizations and entities on mapping out critical services, including eligibility criteria, how to access, and how to provide that warm handoff referral to those programs, and many getting a head start on that application process and making that as seamless as possible. So it's not the deployment of, but it's more training at these key hotspots. And then we'll come together through a forum that we have on a regular basis to do resource sharing. We call it our Basic Needs Committee. We'll come together on a regular basis to kind of do information sharing. So it's really leveraging existing staff that are at those hotspots.
And so you're empowering the community as well as those individuals who live in the community. I love the work that you're doing around financial literacy, because as you said, when children know that there is a vision connected to and an expectation, a high expectation, regardless of their address and their income level, that they will achieve, whether it's college, career, that's a game changer. That's a game changer. I grew up in a community like that, and I can tell you it was a game changer for me. And so thank you for all the work that you're doing.
I appreciate the work you do. Thank you. Question. Yes, this will be put up on, these slides will be shared. And there are a lot of comments giving me feedback on how to operate the Zoom. So appreciate that. And who is UWGPC? United Way of Greater something County?
Hey, Kory, it's Melinda. It's the United Way of Greater Plymouth County. So we're on the South Shore.
Oh, yes.
We're neighbors.
Yeah, Dennis.
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
Great.
I was super excited to see that you were presenting and excited to hear what's happening over in your community, because I know you guys also have partners with the Family Resource Center and a Community Connections Coalition down there as well, correct?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so I was excited to hear what you guys were doing.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
This is Vicki again, and I have to comment because I've had extensive conversations with Eugene, Eileen, and Sabrina as it relates to Footsteps to Brilliance. And I have designed virtual programs, and I can't tell you, so many of our parents, and particularly grandparents, I love the generational work that you're doing, have said that there's just such a lack of access to those resources and to provide literacy resources, particularly during this time when we know the children who have needed us the most. I don't use the term at risk, I use the term high need, and those who are most underserved in our community but lack access to those resources. And so again, just a step in the right direction, and I just applaud your efforts, because that is the game changer for children of color, for children of, you know, all children, regardless of their ethnicity. It's just a game changer when they have access to those resources.
Absolutely, Vicki, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So I want to make myself available if folks have any if they want to learn more about this, or they want to drill down, or they want to connect to their local United Way, I can certainly make an introduction. And so we'll make sure that my contact information is included on the slide deck that's going to be shared with folks. But just to give out my email, it's Kory, K-O-R-Y, at UW, N as in North, C as in Central, M as in Mass.org. So if you want to talk more about this, I'm available. And I just appreciate you joining me today. And I look forward to enjoying the rest of the conference with all of you. So. Bye-bye, folks. Thank you.